Welcome back to the news today. This is One on One. The rise of anti-Semitism in Europe of late is increasingly raising alarms, with violent incidents making headlines. Just this past week, 3 separate bloody attacks in France left the public shaken, causing the government to deploy hundreds of soldiers across the country. Although the motives of the attacks remain unclear, one attacker expressed anti-Israel sentiment as a drive for his actions. On the other hand, a mass protest in Dresden, Germany against the, quote, Islamization of the West drew thousands of supporters. To explore the rising tension that's gripping Europe, we are joined in studio by Dr. Charles Asser-Small, president of the Institute for Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. Thank you very much for being here this evening. Now, I want to start really focusing on your organization. Your motto is the fighting anti-Semitism on the battlefield of ideas. Now, can you expand a little bit on that and what you hope to achieve as an organization?
Sure. So ISGAP is a independent research center, and we do academic programming at top-tier universities in North America and Europe, including McGill, Columbia, Harvard, Sapienza in Rome, and recently we just started a program in the Sorbonne, and we're opening a teacher training program at Oxford. So we're doing academic programming in a space in the academy that I think has been ceded to the enemy. So in that there's been sort of through postmodern philosophy and studies, there's been an attack on Jewish notions of peoplehood within the academy, sort of justifying a critique of not only Israeli policy, but the existence of Israel. And I think that's sort of taking over many fine universities, academic departments, from sociology to the Middle East studies programs around the world. And what we're trying to do is to critically examine or critique the critique of modernity, and to critique the rise of radical political Islam, which is sweeping not only the Middle East, but now entering into the Western world. And there's been sort of a vacuum or a taboo in the academy to critique those who were once colonized. So to critique Palestinian society or to critique North African or Middle East societies is a taboo in the academy now because of the post-colonial, postmodern moment. And we're trying to say, yes, we should critique colonialism and racism, of course, but we need to also look at these reactionary movements in the Middle East that are using anti-Semitism and the demonization of Jewish peoplehood, namely through Israel, to further their objectives of taking over institutions, taking over societies, as we see in Syria and Iraq and North Africa, in places like Mali and northern Nigeria. They focus on the Jew and they focus on Israel as they transform their society. And we can see this sort of social movement now entering into France, as you mentioned earlier, and to other parts of the world.
Right, and we're going to get to Europe, but how do you actually fight an ideology?
I think it's complicated. I think intellectuals, the media of record, need to speak out and defend human rights and to defend democratic principles. In democracy, we have the right to be equal citizens under one legal system, regardless of our background, our religion, our race, our gender, our sexual orientation. All people should be equal under one legal system. Radical political Islam, as we see, is focusing on the Jew, on Israel and Zionism as they try to create a caliphate and to create an Islamic society where women will be marginalized, gay people will be eliminated, Jews will be eliminated or put into second-class citizens, as well as other religious minorities in these societies. So this is a social movement diametrically opposed to the fundamentals of democratic principles, and I think that this movement has been given a pass, and that if we are concerned about protecting democracy and human rights, that we have to fight this ideology intellectually, in terms of policy, and to take a strong position, even militarily, if they're threatening other citizens or peoples based on their identities.
And you mentioned something earlier, and it's what many experts are saying. The issue is anti-Semitism. It's blending now the identity of the Jew, the Israeli, the Zionist. It's all becoming one blended identity and one what they see as legitimate targets. So how do you reverse this and explain that they are indeed separate identities?
So I think we did a study, Edward Kaplan and I did a study a few years ago where we interviewed 5,000 Europeans, and we asked them a series of questions about classical forms of anti-Semitism and several questions about what we called Israel bashing, extreme examples of bashing Israel, that Israel's an apartheid state and the IDF purposely shoots children, sort of these very outrageous claims that are making more and more inroads into our discourse. And what we discovered is that classical forms of anti-Semitism are relatively low, but those who demonize Israel are 13 times more likely than the average population to be classically anti-Semitic. So those who bash Israel, we know, are anti-Semitic disproportionately. Mm-hmm. And what's happening is as the demonization of Jewish peoplehood and the state of Israel accelerates, Jewish students in Western Europe and in North America who have an affiliation to their Jewish identity, who go to Hillels or to Chabad houses and participate in the Jewish life on campus, in this sort of demonization of Israel, Jewish American, Jewish French, Jewish British students are being tarred, if you will, with the same brush on these campuses. So the campuses...
And this is what you're saying is happening in universities, but if this is kind of being born in universities, isn't this a good place to start and a good place to tackle this issue?
Exactly. So this is what our institute is trying to do, to make inroads and really fight on the battlefields of ideas and fight contemporary anti-Semitism. There aren't many intellectuals who will express classical forms of anti-Semitism in terms of the sort of anti-Semitic tropes based on religion or on race. But demonize Israel is now becoming a standard part of the curriculum and of the Western discourse in the finest universities and in the media of record. So we really have to attack this contemporary form of anti-Semitism because, once again, it's being used as a vehicle by a totalitarian, reactionary, anti-Semitic, homophobic, sexist, anti-democratic movement, which is making inroads. So this is really a human rights issue. It's not a Jewish parochial issue.
Mm-hmm. And looking back at anti-Semitism throughout the centuries, it's existed for hundreds of years, and you mentioned this contemporary anti-Semitism. So how is that really different, and how can it really be stopped?
So this is a good question. So it's different in that it's contemporary. It's good to look at history and condemn the racisms and the anti-Semitisms of the past. But today we're clearly confronting a vibrant ideology. We just found out recently that the caliphate in parts of Syria and Iraq is actually larger than Great Britain. And it seems that the Western world, in terms of strategic issues, are not prepared for the emergence of this radical political organization and social movement. We have to confront its ideology in terms of ISIS or Daesh, but we also have to confront the ideology in the more, I'd say, less violent forms in terms of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is getting a pass in Western Europe and even in the United States in their foreign policy. We have President Barack Obama praising a cleric from the Muslim Brotherhood in his General Assembly speech in September of 2014. And this type of pass to the Muslim Brotherhood and sort of Western countries seeing the Brotherhood and now even Hamas as somehow palatable and acceptable is extraordinarily problematic. We really have to attack the ideology of hatred. This ideology, the Muslim Brotherhood, does not accept the other as equal. They cannot accept women or gay people or religious minorities, and in particular Jews, as equal members of society. They either have to be eliminated or be second class, if you will. And this flies in the face of human rights and democratic principles. Yet in the West, the human rights community and the intellectual community has been largely silent. And we see this silence, the vacuum that we've created in the West, is now being filled by some of the most pernicious reactionary movements known to humanity.
And I do want to quickly, while we are running out of time, speak about the protests in Dresden, Germany, about the, quote, Islamization of the West. So is this a general intolerance building? Is this xenophobia? On the flip side of anti-Semitism, what are we seeing here? So
I think in a way that the silence of liberal intellectuals and liberal policymakers in the last 2 decades has created a vacuum. And average working class Europeans are seeing their cities change. They're seeing these reactionary forces. Not all Muslims in Europe are reactionary. In fact, I would argue the vast majority of Muslims in Europe want to be good, law-abiding citizens. But the reactionary forces have been given a pass. And this vacuum is now being filled by Marine Le Pen in France and some other reactionary forces in Germany and the United Kingdom.
We do wish we had more time for this interesting discussion, but Dr. Charles Asser-Small, thank you very much for being here with us this evening. And that is it for today's show. Join us again on Sunday evening right here on I-24 News. Have a good night.